Pandemic or recession, the best of leaders tend to identify opportunities amidst a crisis. A question on the minds of many may be, how does one attract investment in the current crisis? And in the post-COVID era, while some businesses are scaling down and shutting shop, there are others which are expanding aggressively. And amidst the chaos, what's the state of the country's current funding climate? Are deals even happening? What's the investment appetite like among foreign investors? Next, we bring you a panel discussion that will cover the current landscape and funding environment. Our speakers include Nishit Desai, international corporate lawyer, Sandeep Nayak, MD and Head, India and South Asia, General Atlantic, and the conversation will be spearheaded by Amol Dethe, editor, ETBFSI.com and ETCFO.com.
Hello and welcome to ET Global Town Hall. My name is Amol Dethe and I'm in conversation with top speakers, those who are going to talk about funding climate in India. As you are watching Global Town Hall, I would like to welcome all of you and join us to understand the in-depth issues and the challenges that the industry is facing specifically about the funding. So we are going to decode this at ET Global Town Hall with my first speaker, Sandeep Nayak, the MD and Head of India and South Asia General Atlantic. Sandeep, welcome on the show.
Glad to be here.
And my other speaker is Nishit Desai, international corporate lawyer. Nishit, sir, welcome on the show. To begin with, there are three very critical questions that I have, gentlemen, for you. And I will start with you, Sandeep, and just give me a sense specifically about how's the funding climate currently in India and globally. You belong to an important company which is, disbursing funds to a lot of companies, not only the startups, but also, the mid-sized companies as well. So, Sandeep, how are you reviewing the current market right now?
Amol, let me take the global context and then come down to the Indian context. I think what is very interesting is that for the first time, we are seeing a confluence of private equity having raised a lot of capital preceding COVID, because there was a lot of fundraising that was happening in the industry just ahead of COVID. And today you have the industry sitting with $2.3 trillion of dry powder, right? Of dry capital that's waiting to get invested. Right. As you look at that humongous amount of capital that's waiting to get invested, at the same time, you're seeing, as a result of the pandemic, some very high quality companies that we call, we within the General Atlantic system have a list of companies called the Pearl list of companies. These are the pearls. These are companies you would have always wanted to invest, but because either of valuation or the fact that they have never needed capital or the fact that they could always raise capital from the public markets, those opportunities could never really bring themselves in a shape and form that private equity investors would get into those companies. We are today, as a result of the pandemic, seeing some of the highest quality companies that need capital to just tide over this artificial low that we're going to face right now and eventually come out stronger, right? And so as a result, you have this weird confluence of a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines that private equity has raised, a lot of companies and high quality companies that need that capital, and private equity today could truly be the solution that could go back some of the highest quality entrepreneurs and help them not only tide through the COVID crisis, but then eventually come out significantly stronger at the end of it.
And what is your India perspective, Sandeep?
On the India perspective, we remain to be very optimistic in India because of this capital that I talked about, $2.3 billion. Right. This capital is really trying to chase growth opportunities, right? Okay. Growth is where the real market today is. As you search for growth all over the world, the biggest growth area that still is reasonably untapped within the world continues to be India, because with 1.2, 1.3 billion people in India, and of which, let's say 600, 700 million people that can actually be targeted for products and services which the country needs, you could build very sizable companies that would be worth tens of billions of dollars coming out of India. You just dial the clock back 10, 15 years and you looked at how China and China's golden era of GDP growth played out, which gave birth to many companies that today are decacons in the world today. India is sitting right at the inflection point, and the digital infrastructure that got built out in India is going to help India leapfrog what we have seen. And as a result, we are very bullish about the startup community in India,
Right.
because the startup community will then ride on these digital railroads that have been built and give birth to tons of opportunities within the digital space that will lead to companies being decacons in India. We as General Atlantic have backed a lot of these companies. We follow this space very, very deeply. And I couldn't be more optimistic about India and its future than I've ever been in the past.
Very well said, Sandeep. In fact, it's really nice to hear, and there are a lot of examples where the foreign investors are taking interest in India's, market right now, whether it's demographic dividend or the other aspect they are looking at. I will move on to, other panelist, which is Mr. Desai, who carries a great experience specifically in the field of legal and taxation. And whenever it comes to the funding, the important question that comes to everyone's mind is, okay, it's legally viable. It's, whether it's absolutely flexible in terms of taxation. So, Mr. Desai, if you could elaborate here, in terms of the challenges that the companies are facing right now, specifically the foreign companies where they're infusing funds in India.
Yes, absolutely. I think Sandeep
Yeah.
had a good layout on the global scene, and we are still continuing to see that. Right? For a couple of months, like pandemic started sometime in March, those 2 months were a little shocking for many of these people. We were trying to be adjusting, but suddenly what's realized, and Sandeep again mentioned about digital, it has changed the way we think. I think all of us have almost 4 months, we are locked up in a house, but we see that there is so much unlocking of a potential that we all had, but we never were forced to do that. So we never used technology or other kind of stuff, because personally for our firm, it's been different. We've been virtual for a long period of time, and it worked out very well. But what I'm saying is that the digital play out is the name of the game. We are seeing activities in broadly 3 sectors: pharma, healthcare. We do a lot of work on that. There's a lot of interest in that, and a lot of opportunities. Number 2 is on the TMT space, which is doing extremely well. And then financial services with restructuring. And so there are 3 sectors where we really see interest. Where we don't see much interest is in infrastructure still. Okay, we are not seeing much interest. I think the little reduced interest in traditional automobile industries and those kind of things, because the way in which the future is going to unfold, lot different than what we think. I'll talk a little bit about it a little later on. But in terms of our regulatory and tax system, regulatory, if I may say, non-tax regulatory side moves a little faster. On tax side, there are a lot of legacy issues and a lot of subjectivity in our regulations. So there is scope for a lot of interpretation. It is not about the basic rates of tax, which are 25%, 15%. We are touting all that, which is not a bad idea. But where people get stuck is on the actual implementation of law. And the problem with the implementation of law is when you have multiple interpretation or multiple, I would say, looking thing, and when the attention of the tax department is mainly on collection of taxes. Of course, targets were being imposed. Now I believe targets have gone up, but there are a lot of legacy issues. So whole mindset is to collect tax anyhow, and obviously there is pressure because of the lack of productivity, less taxes. So what we are finding is that a lot more provisions that have been included, people are really worried about what will be the consequence. For example, general anti-avoidance provisions, GAR, place of effective management. Many of these provisions have been suddenly introduced in the Income Tax Act, before the system can even adjust. Even non-resident Indians, for example, they had 182-day cushion to come to India and go back. Now the time limit is limited to 120 days. Okay. Now, if people invest into India, they need to come freely. Okay. And don't have to worry too much about what will be my residence. The moment, particularly NRIs from the US, have this major issue that if you become resident of India, you become a resident of India because they are US citizens. They are also US citizens resident over there. So double tax issues are not resolved. We have introduced what I will call the equalization levy. It is neither income tax nor GST, some third animal, and therefore the creditability of equalization levy in the home country is the problem. So there is double taxation of the same income. And those kind of things are really creating a lot of issues. And finally, one small point, that all the civil violations are being given the shape of criminal. Therefore, all the criminal penalties are imposed, fine, not only fine is one thing, but the imprisonment. And the directors are also very scared of coming to India. I can go on giving examples of that. But difficulty is that subjectivity, both in terms of tax and non-tax, and then you've got CBI thing coming up and whatever other ones, for things which so for international investor, it is a very scary situation.
Right.
That is what. Otherwise, at a macro level, tax rates are brought to a reasonable level, okay, overall. But at implementation level, we need to rewrite the whole tax law.
Just to your question around the legal and tax related challenges on the legal side, one of the big secular trends that we as General Atlantic are invested behind, and I see that happening globally, is the transition to the digital economy, right? Technology adoption continues to accelerate as data drives the next decade of disruption. And it's going to be the same for India. India rides the digital wave. Privacy and data security are going to be of utmost importance. And the Personal Data Protection Bill, which if enacted, will redefine the entire functioning of the digital economy in the country. And that, as you know, is pending in the parliament. So we are keeping a close watch on that, because that's going to give rise to a whole new set of entrepreneurial ecosystem in India, given we are trying to be vocal about local, where a lot of local Indian digital startups will be able to not only go after the entire Indian market, but hopefully also go after the global market as a result of the ecosystem supporting it.
Yes, thank you for that addition, Sandeep, to Mr. Desai's comment. And yes, Mr. Desai, absolutely agree with, 2-3 points, whether it's equalization levy, which is a big deal right now. And, there is a good debate going on between India, France, and, USA. I do understand GAR and other issues. And in fact, that I remember you giving your insights when the Vodafone case was going on in Bombay High Court and then Supreme Court. And surprisingly, that issue has even not resolved even today. So, a lot of those taxation related challenges that I can see. But Sandeep, I will come to you specifically. And as Mr. Desai also said, there are demand for certain sectors, but, there is no demand for particular sectors. You being an investor, Sandeep, I would like to learn from you. What are the sectors that you find lucrative right now in this time?
We look at everything with the lens of technology. The reason why we think it's the right way to look at it is because India being an emerging market, for India to grow linearly, just like some of the other developed markets grow, it's going to take too long. And the customer in India today, the Bharat consumer that I keep talking about, right? The startups and the technology companies can't go after the 40 to 50 million Indians who live in the metro cities. They need to create companies that satisfy the needs of the billion plus Bharat consumer, not just the India consumer. And as we look at the Bharat consumer, we cannot grow linearly by building it in a brick and mortar fashion. So the only way we can access them, the only way we can serve them, the only way an aspirational customer sitting in a tier 2 town or a tier 3 town can get the same product and services, digital has to be the enabler. So if I take that as the lens through which you look at various sectors, let's take, for instance, technology as a sector itself. Though technology has become a horizontal that cut across all the sectors, let's take technology as a sector. Within technology, there's a big shift to cloud and SaaS businesses. So we are actively looking at a lot of the cloud and SaaS businesses. There's a big shift to collaboration and productivity platforms. We're seeing that with companies like Zoom, which have been profusive in India. Jio launched their Jio Meet, which already has 7 million consumers. So anything that links to collaboration and productivity platform becomes a very interesting area to invest. Software developmental tools, as a lot of the other businesses across many different sectors try to pivot to digital, you will have companies that will create the software developmental tools to help them go through that pivot. Digital education, we have been huge believers in digital education. We bet on Byju's much before the pandemic hit or any of the tailwinds that the edtech sector has come into play. If you really have to educate the kid sitting in a village and give him or her the front row seat in education, digital education is the only way we bridge that gap. So if you take technology as a platform, these are the sectors we're interested in. Let's move to consumer, right? there's an accelerated shift to online and e-commerce within the consumer sector, right? So how will these companies today scale up? And now, today, these companies will be unit economic positive. They will turn profitable because you have now opened up the funnel to a huge base of consumers that Mr. Desai was talking about, who have reduced the adoption curve and gotten themselves used to, or maybe even forced to get used to using these online capabilities to order their products, to order food. So all the online e-commerce platforms. And there'll be a fundamental decline in the brick and mortar retail platforms that you'll automatically see as a result of that. Digital home fitness, people are working out in virtual sessions right now. It's a humongously efficient game because people don't have to travel to their gyms. You can deliver as good a virtual workout. You can go across and get different kinds of workout done. So digital fitness is an area we're looking at. Gaming, streaming, home entertainment. You've seen the spike with people sitting at home trying to keep themselves occupied. And there's going to be there's a deep and longer term impact on the consumer psychology, on greater focus on health, on safety, on hygiene, on preparedness, and in equal measure on sustainability, right? So those are the areas within consumer. You come to financial services, it's digital banking, it's global payments, digital payment companies. You come to healthcare, it's telemedicine, it is innovation that's happening in biotech and pharma. And I can keep going on, Amol, right? Because I get so excited at where we are today and the multitude of opportunities that are going to open up in India that will truly service the Bharat consumer of India. And that's what the opportunity is, and that's where we are really focused on.
Wow, I've actually engrossed into, when you started dictating, the sectors-wise stories, and I was feeling, wow, so good, such a green story and, the green shoot of India. I'm so sure after watching this episode, many startups and entrepreneurs are going to chase you and send you a lot of proposals.
I would love to. I think the most pleasure we get as an institution and myself as an individual is really backing the Indian entrepreneurs to scale businesses that meet the needs of Indians, not the cut, copy, paste model that worked in the US or China. We need to solve India needs. And if we solve the needs of Bharat, we will have massive companies that will come out of it.
Very, very well said. Sandeep, thank you for the detailed, and a meaningful, answer on specifically the investment side and the sector side. Nishit, sir, my question to you now specifically is, as Sandeep mentioned, these are the sectors that he's looking at, and India has the potential to grow. Again, you obviously mentioned about the legal and taxation challenge. Taking forward the same question, my, specific question to you is now, what is that the foreign investors would like to have, before investing in India? What is the level of comfort that those foreign investors are looking at?
Yeah, I think two things. Number one, first comfort the foreign investor would like to have. See, government understands their business and business model. Okay. If you do not understand my business, what will happen? It will be all patchy.
Right.
And that is why the difficulty. So, have all the patchy regulations also coming simply because they do not understand what you are talking about. So I think at certain level in government, they understand, but it doesn't percolate down to the level where it gets implemented. So I think first thing for them is to understand how the future is going to be. In fact, I was with Chief Minister of Maharashtra and Uber Elevate had come and, CEO at that point of time. They have selected 5 cities in the world to experiment on flying cars. Okay, now flying cars will come in 5 years, but our regulatory framework will not be there. So what happens? There is an opportunity in front of us, but we have not thought through that. We have today time to think of the future. Second, when we look at technology, it's just not regulation. Behind every regulation, there is a philosophy. Okay. And behind that philosophical alignment needs to happen. Otherwise, what happens? There is disjointed approach to bringing new law. A law is nothing else but philosophy. As Sandeep mentioned about, the privacy and the other rules, there is a philosophy behind that. For example, 3D printing is going to come. We know it's going to. What are the IP issues that are going to be? We can't start ball rolling at that point of time. So we have to really look to the future and see and nanotechnology, medical devices, many other things that are huge opportunities. As I said, pharma, healthcare, we do a lot of work. And we see, but there are many challenges because the regulatory framework is still behind, and we should focus more on that.
There is always, in fact, the mismatch also on what the government, sometimes, announces and what comes in the fine print. But Mr. Desai, just quickly, if you could give me one case study or example here in terms of For example, there was a great opportunity for some foreign company to invest in India startup or some company, and they moved away or they shied away because of the regulation, because of they felt that there are so many regulations that we cannot compile with. And is there any example or any case study that you would like to talk about?
For example, there was one instance
Huh.
where there was small collaboration of Japanese company,
Yes.
and apparently what happened was some small officer at the regulatory side, he served a notice on the director of foreign company, which is the parent.
Right.
He said, if you come, this is subject to arrest. That incident made them so nervous, they said, we are not going to come to India, we'll go to Indonesia. Okay. So
Okay.
we also need to be mindful as to, some of these things, of course, we've come a long way in terms of ease of doing business, etc. But practically, there are still issues and we need to weed them out. And many instances, there are cases where directors and Sandeep knows, cases where
Noted. Yes.
for no reason, and it is understandable that we need to look at ESG governance and all that. But difficulties when the laws are written and crafted and developed in a hurry, then interpretation becomes difficult. If the interpretation is difficult, then there is a more discretionary power with the person who has the power, and then after a whole problem arises. So look at why people say we have removed this tax, we have given this exemption, we have given that exemption, but why people are still not coming? Of course, you can take one example and say we got so much FDI in say digital, like
Okay.
Geo did a great job, right? And got one. But if you see the overall number of investments and, it's still, we have a lot to go. I'm sure we can do it, but we need to really be doing it at the speed of thought.
Noted. Noted,
Companies
Mr.
are
Yeah.
trying to flip themselves to become US company. All startup on the top of their mind is that we want to flip it to US.
Yes.
Why?
Interesting thoughts, Mr. Desai. In fact, very, very relevant. You are in fact raising all those points which every startup, every fintech, and every investor wants to, talk about. Very well said, Sandeep. I would like to, specifically ask on the investment side, specifically because you are very bullish, optimistic about India's growth story. You have already invested in many companies, but my question is specifically about the current time. Obviously, you told me the sectors and the subjects that you are interested in, but considering the current time, specifically the COVID issues and all, and we are under the lockdown in last 4 months, have you seen the change in the values? I mean, are you getting a reasonable value right now when you're investing in companies compared to what you would have got before COVID-19?
Let me answer that, Amol, in a couple of different ways, right? So one is we have a very extensive portfolio in India that we already invested in. So when COVID hit, we had a three-pronged response as to how do we respond to the crisis, right? We never react to a crisis. We always have to respond to a crisis. And we said the first thing we need to do is look at our portfolio companies which are directly exposed and have a headwind as a result of COVID. And let's go and further back them so that they are solidified in terms of their capital and they can ride through this crisis. So the first step we took in the first 2 weeks was which of the companies are going to get hit. And these were the brick and mortar retail companies which have a consumer facing brick and mortar format. And we went and solidified them, saying that we are behind you. We will provide the capital you need, so don't worry about it. Let's figure out how we come out stronger from this. Then we went a little bit on the offense and said, which are the companies that have a positive tailwind as a result of COVID? And we went after those companies like our fintech company that we have invested in, like Byju's, Unacademies, No Broker, all the companies that have a digital layer on top, and said, we are here to back you. Let's go consolidate the market. This is the time when all your competitors are going to be having problems because of either lack of capital or because they may not be able to react to it the way we can react. So let's go and do an M&A and consolidate the market. So we pressed our winners and put more capital behind our winning companies, saying we need to come out significantly better than the competitor at the end of this crisis. And third, to answer your question directly, we said, what are the pearl list of companies that we have tracked for 5 years? Now let's go to them and say, hey, we know you still may not need capital because you're a well-run company, great founder, great management team. But we are here to support you if you really want to solidify your capital structure and take advantage, and let's not waste this crisis. How can a top quality company like you take advantage of this crisis and really become significantly stronger than the rest of your peers. And there we are getting a lot of interactions where companies that never needed capital are coming and saying, hey, if we can get someone like a General Atlantic and you to back us, now is the time for the next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, we can truly consolidate the market. So let's go out and do that. So I don't want to comment on valuation. It is giving rise to a new set of opportunities which may have never come before. And that in itself creates phenomenal opportunities for us to back great entrepreneurs that are building out this country and really help them scale their vision. And I think therein lies the real opportunity of what you're facing. I'll give you an example of Jio, right? Jio is a great validation of a lot of the global tech companies, Facebook, Google, Intel, Qualcomm, coming and validating the India story. We don't need to look anywhere else to see, is the India story validated? It just got validated by $15 billion that got put behind a single company. So here are people who are saying, look at this big market, look at the untapped potential, look at what growth we can get. We will play it however we can. And they chose to play it through Jio, including us, because we thought that Jio has built the digital rails and infrastructure on which we can provide the products and services and truly build the digital society of India. Right. If there was ever a company that could go and compete with the Alibabas, the Tencents of the world, the Facebook, Google's, Amazon, Netflix of the world, the one large company that could come out of India is Jio. And, and that's why you see all these investors coming and participating in Jio to basically have a play on the Indian economy. So we don't need to look far for validation. We have just seen it in the past 14 weeks in terms of what has happened in India. So, you know, I would be surprised if people would not be bullish about where we sit today and the value inflection that will happen in our country today. But we need to solve the Bharat problems, not just the India problems.
Sandeep, one more question here, maybe a small cross question, but you know, more on an industry perspective, not typically related to startups. If you look at the current banking sector right now, or the entire financial sector, the banks and the financial institutions are not doing good. And you know, the credit cycle has been broken. Banks prefer not to lend to many borrowers, but you know, deposit their money to RBI under the reverse repo. So the credit is not available to most of the borrowers right now, whether it's startups or fintechs or mid-sized companies. Is that an opportunity for companies like you or the other fund companies or investment companies?
Absolutely. All of these are opportunities, right? Even in financial services, there are some phenomenal high-quality banks that are today raising capital. So there's an opportunity to go back some of the top-quality banks who would have easily raised capital from the public markets. And today there's a way for us also to participate in that. You're looking at a lot of non-banking finance companies that are very good underwriting skills, but today don't have the capital because they are not able to really borrow from some of these banks. There are opportunities to go back them. And eventually, as you know, and Mr. Desai can further confirm, unless credit flows in the economy can't grow. And our regulators and our government is keenly aware of that. And I fully expect them to really support the financial services ecosystem such that credit starts flowing again. Otherwise, the entire supply chain working capital gets broken if credit is not available. So we are all keenly watching the space. And I hope all the stakeholders, the government, the regulators, the investors, and the entrepreneurs come together and figure out a solution to that.
Thanks, Sandeep, for that very insightful thoughts. Mr. Desai, you know, you spoke about the Japanese company wanted to enter in India, but they moved on to Indonesia because they did not like, you know, the regulatory environment or whatever the queries were raised. Largely, if you look at the crisis or the situation, if government wants to do something, they can. If policyholders and regulators wants to do something, they can. And IBC is one of a very interesting example. Better position, it's much better law, or in fact, you know, regulations that has been there in the market, which gives a lot of flexibility to creditors to, you know, recover the money from the debtors. But this kind of revolution didn't happen in many aspects. So, you know, to retain the Japanese client who didn't go to Indonesia but stay back in India, do you think that it's not only the government but also the policymakers and the regulators has to be on the same page because they are not right now?
I think two things I would suggest. One, every time any law is framed, any discretion that is given to any officer, that must be reviewed by a special committee, because discretion plus monopoly is equal to corruption, if I put it in simple words. Now, so, you know, we need to see how what kind of discretion we are giving and in whose hands it is given, right? So that is where the starting point is. And number two, that even if there are, some violations, I'm not suggesting everyone, but at least by and large, lot of violations can be simply compromised. And here, what happens is that the compounding system is not in place. You can't close the case for a long time. If something is 10 years time, whether matter is open or closed, those things are going on. So I think it is, I believe that at a high level in the government, there is good understanding. But when it comes to implementation, which always happens through mid-level people,
Right.
okay, that is where the gaps are. And we need to have more stringent process to
Right.
bring in the regulations. Otherwise, I think there is good environment. Just to, well, I talked about the negative side. The positive side is there's a lot of capital. Every second day, we are approached by one GP or the other for new fund. And they are all able to raise, only thing, where do you deploy? So the opportunity, as Sandeep was mentioning, credit, for example, venture capital, venture debt funds have also come into being, and they are becoming very popular, right? So there are different levels, have different ways of funding, but we need to see that how do we accelerate the process. It is not that we do not want to do it or we do not have potential, but potential after 10 years is no use at this point in time.
Right.
If we will take 1 minute, entire idea of make in India, I think we need to revisit. I'm not undermining the importance. Don't get me wrong, but make in India will not create immediate employment. Next 5 to 7 years, let me frankly tell my own as a lawyer, independent view, it will take 7 to 10 years if we start putting things in order now. Okay,
Right.
our vision has to change to Chinese level. Okay, manufacturing has a lot more fixed capital, so you cannot change the technology if changes in manufacturing. We see angel investors already available. We see venture capitalists, they've got money. Private equity has a lot of money. Okay, a lot of interest we've seen from sovereign funds for long-term investment.
Right.
And we just meeting with them. And of course, the other LPs, long-term investors, they're all there ready to come. Are we able to tap them at the speed of thought? In internet world, 3 months makes a year. So,
True.
if you delayed by 1 year, it is almost 3 or 4 years behind, and that 5 years. So I think we'll have to come to grips with that and try to identify services as soon as possible. That will be fine.
Right, Mr. Desai, very well said again. And I think we are just, the watch is ticking, the time is just coming to an end, but I will still take 1 minute from each one of you. And quick question, Sandeep, you specifically spoke about data. Two things, Sandeep, going ahead specifically about India, what are the stories of India that you are bullish on? What kind of sectors, what kind of, the companies that you are bullish on? And second is, to invest in these companies, what kind of environment are you looking for? What is your biggest challenge? So this is the question for you, Sandeep, in two parts.
India needs to grow at a non-linear rate right now. The 4-5% growth is not going to cut it out for us. We are not going to get to the kind of numbers we need to get. Yes. I truly believe that with technology, the digital economy will contribute almost $1 trillion of value, economic value add by 2025, right? Okay. And if we need to achieve that, we need to start thinking more from a tech-enabled standpoint and looking across all the sectors and the opportunities that I mentioned across all the sectors. So I continue to believe that that's how India will get built, and we will be able to leapfrog and catch up with some of the most developed economies if we truly leverage ourselves with the tech capabilities that we have. And the good thing is, unlike many other countries that I also cover in Southeast Asia, India has the tech capabilities, the engineers, the minds that can build these companies. We don't have to rely on anyone else to do this work. In fact, we are the producers of the highest number of engineers that are helping some of the countries in adjoining areas. Like in Indonesia, one of the largest tech players, consumer tech players in Indonesia, their back office sits in India, where all the engineers sit in India. And this is the most successful consumer tech company supposedly in Indonesia. So we have the talent, we have the thought process, and we have the ecosystem with enough of the entrepreneurs in the mix and enough of investors that are chasing these entrepreneurs to create absolute magic here in the country. In terms of the regulations and the ecosystem, I think that the data, given it's very sensitive and what it needs to, as long as companies comply with the rules and regulations of whichever economy that they are playing in, that should be really the threshold in terms of what should be the expectations from these tech companies. And as long as they are doing that, I think there's so much shareholder value creation that's left, that will really help you build this country, that it would be a missed opportunity for us not to take advantage of where we are sitting today to really build out the country.
Mr. Desai, tell me quickly, what is that the government should do right now to take the benefit of the situation so that most of the foreigners, investors could pump in capital into India?
The way in which I look at, I think government should begin to look at future technologies and start building regulatory framework for that. There is a lot of material available. A lot of other countries have done it. So our laws should be harmonized, may not be identical, but can be similar. Then they can easily do the business. So let's identify what are the future technologies that are going to come. And as Sandeep mentioned, it's all going to be about tech. Okay. So whether it is blockchain, whether it is IoT, whether it is medical devices, AR, VR, even tourism, etc., AR, VR is going to play a major role. We should look at those ones and see that we start putting our framework in place today. Otherwise, it's a catch-up game. We are first of all trying to catch up with the past. As IBC, oh, we make a grade out of it. It should have been happening long ago, right? Maybe, but we are happy, better late than never. That's our philosophy. And if we can't do some work this life, we have next life, because we believe in reincarnation. So, we don't have, but I'm saying the speed of thought is very important. So past one is one, present issues, you have to first finish the operative or the current issues on the hand, quick resolution one way or the other, but then focus on the future, because the real potential lies in the future. And that is where we should have regulatory framework, little more clearer thinking. Otherwise, at last minute, you rush, something goes wrong, and you have all the negative things coming up, right?
Thank you, gentlemen, for making this panel really remarkable. Thank you so much.
I hope you are gaining valuable insights from these sessions, which we have collated for you. You are welcome to visit our expo booth to solve any session-specific queries. In these unprecedented times, we are all here as industry professionals to support each other and to grow together. And so do have a look across the various booths in our expo center to find business solutions right for you.